My parents banned me from Christmas for years and only loved my brother at his job interview revealed that I was CEO and his face went pale. I stopped going home for Christmas when I was 22 years old, not because I did not want to see my family, but because my family made it very clear that I was no longer part of the picture. Every December the same pattern repeated. My mother would call and talk endlessly about my brother Daniel. About his grades, his friends, his plans, his future. She would say how proud they were of him, how special he was, how much potential he carried, and then at the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, she would sigh, "Christmas will be small this year. Maybe you should stay where you are and save money." The first time she said it, I believed her. I thought maybe things were tight, maybe they were stressed, maybe it was practical, so I stayed in my tiny apartment with a microwave dinner and told myself it was temporary. Then I saw the photos my cousin posted them online, the tree towering over the living room, my father carving a turkey, my mother smiling like a magazine cover, and Daniel in the center holding a stack of gifts high enough to hide his face. The caption read, "Perfect family Christmas." I was not in any of the pictures because I was not invited. When I asked my mother about it, she said, "We did not think you would want to come, you always seem so busy. And besides, your brother needs more support right now." That was the beginning of a sentence I would hear for years. Your brother needs more support. Your brother is under pressure. Your brother has such a bright future. We cannot distract him. I became the distraction. It did not matter that I had graduated at the top of my class while working 2 jobs. It did not matter that I built a small tech consulting business from nothing out of a rented co-working space. It did not matter that I was paying my own bills without ever asking them for help. None of that compared to Daniel simply existing in their living room every Christmas. After that followed the same script, a polite suggestion that maybe I should skip it this year, followed by carefully curated photos that made it clear the celebration was whole without me. At some point I stopped asking. Instead I poured everything into work. I told myself that if I could not belong at home, I would build somewhere else to stand. I worked through holidays, through birthdays, through weekends. While my phone stayed silent in December, I watched the city lights from my office window and convinced myself that ambition was warmer than family. The truth was, it was not warmer, but it was predictable. Within 5 years my small consulting project turned into something larger. Clients recommended, US investors called, and suddenly I was not just surviving, I was leading. I hired people who believed in the vision. I stayed late with them, ordered cheap takeout, and listened to their ideas. We built something steady, something real. I never told my parents how big it was getting. They never asked. Whenever we spoke, the conversation circled back to Daniel, his internships, his professors, his interviews. My mother would say, "He is interviewing with such important companies. Imagine if he becomes a manager before 30. We are so proud." I would say, "That sounds great," and swallow the rest. Last year they did not even pretend to invite me for Christmas. My mother called and said it would be better if I did not come because Daniel was bringing his girlfriend's family, and they wanted everything to be perfect. I remember standing in my kitchen holding the phone, staring at the blank wall, while she explained how crowded the house would be, how stressful, how maybe next year would be different. Next year never came. Then 2 months ago my father called with a different tone. His voice was careful, almost formal. He said Daniel had an important final interview with a fast-growing company, a serious opportunity, and that it would mean a lot if I came to town to support him. Just this once. I almost laughed. For years I had been too unnecessary for Christmas, but suddenly I was needed as an extra chair at a celebration for my brother. I asked what company. He said a mid-sized technology firm that was expanding aggressively. They were looking for a new operations director, and Daniel had made it through several rounds. He sounded impressed, intimidated, hopeful. When he said the name of the company, my hand tightened around the phone. It was my company, not in the early co-working space version, not in the struggling consultant version, but the version we had become after a merger and a rebrand, the version with multiple offices and a board and a leadership team, the version where my title read Chief Executive Officer. Daniel had applied through public channels. He had no idea, neither did my parents. For a long moment I considered telling my father right then. I imagined the silence on the other end, the confusion, the disbelief. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was a small wounded part of me that wanted to see their faces in real time. So I said, "Of course I will come." When I arrived at the house the week of the interview, nothing had changed. The same wreath on the door, the same family photos lining the hallway, except I noticed something else. Every frame featured Daniel: school portrait, sports awards, graduation day. I was in exactly one photo near the back from years ago, partially hidden behind a lamp. My mother hugged me quickly, distracted, already talking about the interview schedule, the suit Daniel would wear, the importance of first impressions. My father shook my hand like I was a distant colleague. Daniel barely looked up from his phone when I walked in. He said hey, and then launched into a monologue about the company, about how impressive their growth was, how the leadership team seemed visionary, how Thesia must be some kind of genius to scale so fast. I listened quietly. He said, "If I get this role, it will change everything. I could finally prove I am the one who made it, the one." I wondered what that made me. That night at dinner, my parents spoke about Daniel's future in glowing terms. My mother said we always knew he would rise above everyone else. My father nodded and said, "Some people are just born to lead." I felt something settle inside me, not anger, not exactly, more like clarity. For years I had tried to earn a place at their table by achieving more, by shrinking less, by waiting patiently for recognition, but sitting there watching them orbit around my brother like he was the sun, I understood that nothing I did would rewrite the story they had chosen in their version. I was the extra, the background character, the one who left so that the hero could shine. They never once asked about my work, not that night, not any night. The morning of the interview I offered to drive Daniel to the office. He seemed surprised, but agreed. During the ride he rehearsed answers out loud describing how he would improve efficiency, how he would inspire teams, how he understood vision at the highest level. I asked him what he knew about this. He said not much, just that he or she must be ruthless to make decisions like that. Ruthless. I parked outside the building, the glass reflecting the winter sky, and for a second I remembered the first day I signed the lease on a one-room space with peeling paint and a borrowed desk. I remembered eating instant noodles while drafting proposals. I remembered every Christmas spent alone. Daniel adjusted his tie and looked at the building with awe. He said, imagine working here, imagine reporting directly to someone that powerful. I turned off the engine and finally looked at him fully. I said, imagine that. Then I stepped out of the car and walked beside him toward the entrance, ready to open a door he never expected me to hold. We stepped into the lobby together, and the first thing Daniel did was slow down, as if the air inside the building was different, heavier, charged with importance. The floors gleamed, the reception desk curved like a sculpture, and our company logo stretched across the wall in brushed steel, bold, confident, undeniable. He looked around with open admiration, and I watched him take it in the way I once had, when it was nothing but a sketch in a notebook. The receptionist smiled at me in recognition, but she was well trained. She did not say my title, she simply greeted me by name and handed me a visitor badge as if this were routine. Daniel did not notice the familiarity, he was too busy rehearsing lines under his breath. We rode the elevator up to the executive floor, and as the doors closed he caught his reflection in the mirror while adjusting his tie again, checking his hair, steadying his breathing. He said, this is it. This is the kind of place that changes lives. I said, yes it does. When the elevator opened, several members of my leadership team were already waiting near the conference room. They greeted me with polite nods, subtle but respectful. Daniel mistook it for standard corporate courtesy. He extended his hand confidently, introducing himself with a firm voice, explaining how honored he was to be considered for the operations director role. One of my board members glanced at me, briefly, understanding flickering in his eyes. He had reviewed Daniel's application the night before at my request. He knew the last name, he knew the connection, but he had not said a word. Daniel was led into the conference room first, while I stayed behind under the pretense of another meeting. I watched through the glass as he sat at the long table, back straight, shoulders squared, trying to embody leadership. The interview began with routine questions, his experience, his approach to conflict, his management philosophy. He spoke clearly, confidently, sometimes even impressively. I will give him that he had prepared well. He spoke about efficiency, about vision, about loyalty to company values. Loyalty, the word echoed strangely. After about 20 minutes, the head of operations asked the final question, what does leadership mean to you? Daniel paused as if searching for something profound. He said, leadership means being the center, the one people rely on, the one who carries the weight while others follow. It means being chosen. Being chosen. I felt that familiar clarity settle deeper inside me. The head of operations thanked him and then said, there is one more person you should meet before we conclude. Daniel straightened immediately, expecting perhaps a senior executive, maybe even the mysterious chief executive officer he had speculated about. The door opened and I walked in. At first he looked confused, as if I had entered the wrong room, as if I were simply there to observe, maybe offer encouragement. As a sibling, I took the seat at the head of the table. Silence shifted in the air. I folded my hands calmly and said, thank you for your time, Daniel. I wanted to personally sit in on the final portion of this interview. His eyes moved from me to the others on the table and back again, searching for context that would make this normal. One of the board members spoke gently, Daniel, this is our chief executive officer. The color drained from his face so quickly it was almost unreal. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. His confident posture collapsed into something smaller and certain. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. I held his gaze, not with anger, not with triumph, but with steady composure. He said, you just that one word? I nodded. Yes. The room remained quiet, giving him space to process. He glanced down at the table, then back up, his hands trembling just enough to betray him. I did not raise my voice. I did not dramatize the moment. I simply began asking him the same questions I would ask any candidate. Tell me how you handle being overlooked. He blinked, clearly not expecting that direction. He spoke about resilience, about staying focused, about proving yourself through results. I listened carefully, then I asked, what do you do when loyalty is one-sided? He swallowed hard. He tried to answer in corporate language about communication and accountability, but his voice lost its rhythm. For years I had been the shadow in our house, the background in their photographs, the optional invitation, and now here we were in a room where titles were not assigned by favoritism but earned through relentless work. When the interview ended, I thanked him professionally and told him we would be in touch regarding our decision. He stood slowly, still pale, still shaken. As he walked toward the door, he stopped and turned to me. Why did you never tell us? There it was, not congratulations, not pride, not apology. Why did you never tell us? I met his eyes and said, you never asked. He left the room without another word. The board members remained seated in thoughtful silence. One of them finally spoke, asking if I wanted the decision to be objective. I said, absolutely. Nepotism has no place here. They nodded in agreement. Later that evening I drove back to my parents' house alone. Daniel had chosen to take a taxi. He had texted our mother before I even reached the car. When I walked through the front door, the atmosphere felt different, heavier, with unspoken tension. My mother stood in the kitchen, her arms crossed. My father sat at the table staring at nothing. Daniel was already there, pacing. My mother spoke first, her voice sharp with disbelief. Is it true? I set my keys on the counter calmly. Yes, you are the CEO of that company. Yes. My father looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. Why did you keep this from us? The question sounded almost identical to Daniel's. I leaned against the counter, steady. I did not keep anything from you. You never once asked about my work, not in detail, not beyond polite small Talk you were always focused on Daniel. Future silence filled the space between us. My mother shook her head as if trying to rearrange reality. We would have been proud. I felt something shift inside me. At those words, would you? I asked softly. Because 4 years I was not even invited to Christmas. Daniel stopped pacing, his voice tight. This was supposed to be my opportunity. I looked at him carefully. It still can be if you're in it. The room seemed smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were listening. My father finally stood up, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. We did not know. I nodded. That is the point. For the first time in years, they were not orbiting around Daniel. They were looking at me directly, not as an afterthought, not as background, but as something they had failed to see, and the weight of that realization hung in the air between all of us, heavier than any Christmas silence that had come before. That night no one slept. The house felt like it was holding its breath, as if one wrong word would shatter whatever fragile understanding had begun forming. In the kitchen I stayed in my old room. The same pale walls, the same narrow bed, the same shelf where trophies once stood before, quietly disappearing over the years, replaced by more of Daniel's awards. Downstairs, for the first time since I was a teenager, I did not feel angry in that room. I felt distant, almost calm, like I was observing someone else's childhood. In the morning my mother knocked softly before entering. She looked smaller somehow, not physically but emotionally, as if certainty had drained out of her. She sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I did not realize how much we pushed you aside." I studied her face, searching for defensiveness, but I did not see it. I saw confusion, regret, and something like shame. "You did not just push me aside," I said gently. "You erased me when it was convenient." Her eyes filled with tears. "We thought you were strong," she said. "You never complained, you never asked for help." Daniel needed more reassurance. He was sensitive. I let that settle. "Strength is not the absence of hurt," I said. "It is surviving without support." Downstairs my father and Daniel were already at the table when we joined them. The air was tense but not explosive, more like the aftermath of a storm. My father cleared his throat and spoke first. "I owe you an apology." The words sounded heavy, as if they had been rehearsed. I thought focusing on Daniel would guarantee at least one success story. I did not think I was sacrificing another. I nodded slowly. "But you were." Daniel looked exhausted. The confidence he carried into the interview replaced by something more. "I did not know," he said quietly. "I really did not know. I believed them when they said you preferred being alone, that you were too busy, that you did not care about holidays." I almost smiled at that. I cared. I just stopped baking. Silence followed. But it was different from the silence of years past. It was not avoidance, it was reflection. Finally Daniel looked at me directly. "Am I getting the job?" The question was simple, stripped of ego. I answered honestly. "The board is reviewing all candidates. Objectively, your performance was solid, but there are others with more experience. The decision will not be based on last names." He nodded, absorbing that without argument. "And if I do not get it, then you build your own path," I said, the way I did. For a long moment he held my gaze, and something shifted between us. Not rivalry, not resentment, but recognition. That afternoon I returned to the office alone, leaving my family to sit with everything unsaid and newly said. 2 days later the board reached a decision. Daniel was not selected. The role went to a candidate with a decade of operational leadership across multiple firms. I called Daniel personally. He answered on the second ring. I told him the outcome plainly. There was a pause, but no anger. "I understand," he said. "I was not ready." That honesty surprised me. He continued, "I relied on being chosen my whole life. I did not realize how much that shaped me." "Neither did I." I replied. Another pause, softer this time. "I am proud of you," he said awkwardly, like the words were unfamiliar. "Thank you," I answered. A week later my parents asked if I would come for dinner. No occasion, no celebration, just dinner. When I arrived there was no towering tree, no elaborate setup, just the 4 of us around the table. For the first time the conversation did not revolve around Daniel. My father asked about expansion plans. My mother asked how I handled stress at that level. Daniel listened more than he spoke. It was not perfect. There were uncomfortable gaps, moments where we almost slipped into old habits, but each time someone corrected, gently steering us back to balance. At the end of the meal my mother stood and walked to the hallway. She returned holding a frame. It was an old photograph of me at 20. To standing outside my first office space, smiling nervously beside a hand-painted sign. "I found this in storage," she said. "We should have had it up." She placed it on the mantel beside the others. Not hidden, not secondary, but equal. The gesture was small, yet it carried weight. As winter approached they asked again about Christmas. This time the invitation was direct. "We want you there, not because we need support for Daniel, not because it looks complete, but because you are our daughter." I studied their faces, searching for obligation, but I saw sincerity. I said, "I will come." Christmas morning felt unfamiliar in the best way. There were fewer gifts, less spectacle, more conversation. Daniel helped in the kitchen. My father burned the toast. My mother laughed when the smoke alarm went off. At one point Daniel handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a simple silver pen engraved with the word founder for signing. "The next big deal," he said with a shy smile. I felt something inside me finally soften completely. Later that evening as we sat by the tree Daniel spoke quietly. "I used to think being the center meant being loved the most," he admitted. "Now I think it just meant being protected from growth." Our parents exchanged a glance full of reflection. My father nodded. "We confused favoritism with care," he said, "and that hurt both of you in different ways." No one argued. The truth was enough. In the months that followed our dynamic continued shifting. Not magically, not instantly, but steadily. Daniel took a position at a smaller firm, working his way up without shortcuts. He called occasionally for advice, and I gave it, not as a superior but as a sibling. My parents visited my office for the first time, walking through the glass doors, not with entitlement but with awe. My mother squeezed my hand in the lobby and whispered, "You built this." "Yes," I said simply. One evening after they left I stood alone in the conference room, remembering the moment. Daniel's face went pale, the shock unraveling The truth crashing into carefully constructed assumptions. I did not feel triumph about it anymore. I felt closure. Years of being excluded had shaped me into someone capable of building without applause, capable of thriving without validation. But now I no longer needed to prove anything, not to them, not to Daniel, not even to myself. The final shift happened quietly the following Christmas. My mother handed me the carving knife and said, "Your turn." It was symbolic more than practical, but everyone understood. I carved the turkey while Daniel set the table, and my father poured drinks, and my mother arranged plates, and for the first time the room did not revolve around one person. It felt balanced, imperfect, human, and real. Later that night, as snow fell outside, Daniel sat beside me on the porch. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not using that moment to humiliate me." I looked at him carefully. "I did not reveal who I was to embarrass you," I said. "I revealed it because hiding was no longer my role." He nodded slowly. "I am glad you stopped hiding." "So am I." Inside the house, our parents laughed at something trivial, ordinary, warm. For years I believed success would be the loudest revenge. That achievement would echo through every silent Christmas. But in the end, the real victory was simpler. It was being seen, not as the distraction, not as the afterthought, not as the optional invitation, but as myself, and that was enough. If you were constantly overlooked in your own family but later found success on your own, would you reveal the truth the way I did? Or would you walk away without ever looking back? If this story hit close to home, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below what you would have done in that interview room. Subscribe for more real family drama stories with powerful endings. And remember, sometimes the best comeback isn't revenge. It's finally being seen.